This is Everyday Spirituality with connect.faith. I'm Debbie Bronkova, and I'm here today with David Tullock, and he is the publisher of Parson's Porch books, whose tagline is turning books into bread and milk. David, we're really glad that you joined us today. As I told you before, our tagline is creativity, spirituality, and justice. And it just feels like you are a really good match for that, because you put spiritual growth into your work with getting authors published and turning the books into bread. So I just wanted to ask you, how did you get started with that? Where was your beginning idea for this project?
Well, I'll try to give a short answer. Basically, when I received my doctorate in 1991, I went the next spring to Gethsemane Abbey, where Thomas Merton is famous for living, and took a retreat there, basically asking the question for myself, what's next? And I was already frustrated because I didn't think that the local church I was serving, especially, and then it was confirmed with another church that I served later on, that they were as mindful about the poor in the community as I thought they needed to be. So first of all, I took that on as a teaching opportunity for me to teach the congregation, lead them in that direction. And they did so fairly well. But for some personal problems in 97, I ended my marriage, which disqualified me in the Baptist circles for any kind of ministry, a formal ministry. But fortunately, I was, quote unquote, picked up by a Presbyterian denomination and was able to serve in the pastoral capacity in another denomination. But then I hit another church who was the wealthiest church in the city at that time, and they were completely unaware of any poor people around them, although literally across the tracks from the church was the poorest section in the state of Tennessee and the highest crime rate. So again, I was back to that frustrating point of what do I do? And it culminated after about 4 years in a elder on the session came to me privately and said that she and her husband were having difficulty making their utility payment that month. And I was totally surprised that she, of all people, would be having that kind of difficulty. But I assured her that the church would take care of it anonymously, and that she had no embarrassing moments to worry about because I would keep it totally to me, which I did. And I turned the receipt in to the financial secretary, who had reimbursed me anonymously. And then at the next session meeting, which was just a few weeks after that, seated next to the woman I helped, the session, in particular, one elder on the session berated me because I didn't come through the benevolence committee, who had an operating budget of $1,800 per year. Now you can do the math on that and how much that averages out. And then I explained that I helped a church member. I didn't identify her as an elder. And they continued to chastise me for not going through the proper channels. And I knew if I had done that, that her anonymity would be blown. So after that session meeting, as you can imagine, Deborah, I was I was hot, angry in my truck coming home. And I said, there has to be a better way to do this than the traditional way through this congregation in particular. So over the next a month or so, I made a list of every single person that knew me well enough that they could trust me just to send me money and I named it Parson's Porch. This was in 2004. And lo and behold, in about a month's time, I had $10,000 collected, and I knew that I needed to get to a lawyer and get this thing organized a little more formally. So at that point, Parson's Porch became a 501(c) or C3, whichever one it is. And then we officially incorporated in 2004. But my only short side was I didn't allow in my incorporation any funds to be designated to me for income. So that was a big oversight, and I maintained that, but then thought there's got to be another way that I can support my family and still, give significantly to the poor, especially in my zip code. Right. So one of my friends at the time was a noted author. In fact, he was a former pastor at First Presbyterian Church in Lynchburg, Virginia. His name is John Killinger. Okay. And he just suggested to me, after I had organized and written or edited a festschrift in his honor for his 75th birthday, that I should consider publishing, because there was a niche there for pastors and all kinds of writers for a simple approach to publishing, where one didn't have to wait a year or so just for approval, and then another year or so for publication. And I just kind of arrogantly looked at him and said, "Send me a manuscript." And he did, and I published it. And then from that, he recommended me to, half a dozen other authors of note, and they sent me manuscripts. So off we were in about 2008 or so. So in 2010, I decided that it was time to cut bait or fish, and I took it to my little congregation to see if they wanted to incorporate it into their ministry, and I would essentially give that to them as their benevolence ministry if they would allow me to publish books. It was a part-time assignment, and they did not want that. They wanted a full-time pastor, which I took that as my signpost there. So I resigned my congregation, renounced my jurisdiction from the presbytery, and began full-time in 2010 as a publisher to fund my benevolence ministry. And so here I am in 2021, completely independent and functioning as a publisher, plus also funding all that I do with the poor, mainly in the 37311 area code that I live in, which has a very high population of homeless people. So that's it in a nutshell.
Oh, that's an amazing story. And it's really very powerful to hear how you kept listening for what your call was, and were willing to say yes to things that were kind of experiments and ways to jump out.
Yes, and I have regretted over and I'm saying this tongue in cheek, but I will never ask again what's next at a retreat, because it's taken me almost 30 years to really get to where I've got this thing managed now. But I have enjoyed it thoroughly, and even with its challenges over the last 30 years and during the process.
So at this point, how is it working for you in terms of your own creative journey? Are you a writer? Is this a piece of your story, or do you get your spiritual feeding from helping other people get their words out there, or both?
Well, both, because in the Hebrew language and the Greek language, the same word is translated publisher and preacher. So, technically there's no difference between the two. And I was trained through college, seminary, and in my doctor of ministry degree at Southern Seminary in Louisville in preaching. I love preaching and speaking, but I love most just the grunt work of biblical study in the original languages and that sort of thing. So it wasn't really a hard switch for me to understand that printed sermons need to be out there as much as the spoken sermon does. And so that's really where I started advertising, was just looking through church websites and finding a pastor who either had his or her manuscripts online, or I could tell by their style that they had a printed manuscript behind their spoken word too. And my business model was not to charge anything for the services, from receiving the manuscript to loading it to the distributor and making it available. So the only possible money that a writer will pay me is when they actually buy copies of their own book. So Deborah, you know how that works. I think you've done 2 books with us, and that's the way we model that. And again, I haven't missed a meal, I haven't missed a house payment, and I've raised 3 kids to adulthood. So in that period of time, so I do believe that God gives us what we need when we need it. Now that does take some elbow grease on my part, but again, it's listening and you know, following, however reluctant we may be, the way we feel that God is leading us.
Amazing. Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed and appreciated about you is how quickly you respond to people, and how quickly you respond. Even with the printed copy of the book, the local bookstore here was very quick to tell me that she's never heard of this kind of turnaround.
Oh, wow, good. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah.
I appreciate that. That has to take a lot of work and effort on your part to be that attentive to the projects that come your way. So,
well, I take it seriously because I wrote every sermon I preached. So I have a long, you know, backlog of written manuscript sermons. So I know what it takes to do that kind of diligent work to get a written sermon. So I try to honor that to extend the pastor preacher's ministry beyond just the podium, but into a book that is very useful in so many ways for that pastor.
That's wonderful. So tell us more about how the books into bread and milk part of your journey works.
Okay. Of course, my primary commitment is to provide for my family. That's given. But I also feel like my secondary commitment is to help others. I don't think there's any argument about that in Jesus' teaching. And for me, it was just the basics of shelter, safety, clothing, food, those things that was where I really felt like the emphasis needed to be done without a lot of vetting. I really have a problem with these agencies who help tremendously, but it seems like 2 or 3 weeks for somebody to go through their vetting system just to get a bag of groceries. And I just think that's abhorrent. Yeah. So I joined forces unofficially with a community kitchen. I just started hanging out there even before I started this ministry. I just hung out. I went down and ate lunch with the homeless who at the community kitchen. They provide a hot meal every day except for Saturday and Sunday for homeless. And they just come, line up, get their meals, and go either inside and eat or eat in the parking lot or under a shade tree somewhere. So I just started hanging out, dressed in my jeans, looked like a homeless person myself, and just kind of hung out, so to speak. And then I would just ask 2 questions. My first question was, how are you doing? And they would tell me. And then I would work my way around to say, well, do you need anything? And usually they would say, no, really, I'm fine. Or they may say, boy, I could use a pair of shoes. Well, I just kind of tucked it away. And then I went to Walmart and bought a pair of shoes, brought it back to the director of the kitchen. And I said, give this to John or Susie or whoever the person was. And they never knew it was me doing it. They don't even know I'm a pastor. But I think they probably guess it, but I never tell them that. And but eventually I zeroed in on what I think is the Eucharist, Holy Communion, basically gratitude. And I call it celebrating gratitude with bread and milk. And so now through August, we have given a little over 10,000 cartons of milk to the kitchen, about 1,200 or so a month. That they just come up, and it's part of that they can have water, bottled water, and now they have a choice of milk in, little school carton sizes.
Yeah.
And then that's every other week. And then the alternate weeks, I make sure that several dozen loaves of bread are delivered there. So I literally give my books, and the money from that turns into milk and bread for the homeless. And when I'm there and I'm drinking my carton of milk and my loaf of my slice of bread, they don't know it, and I don't say it out loud, but I really feel a sense of the holy and the Eucharist, and this is my body, this is my blood. And we're celebrating that subversively is my favorite word of that. And I really think, for me at least, it is the most effective expression of my own personal faith than I can imagine. And if I think of a better way or more effective way, then I'll adjust it again. But right now, that really works well for me. That way, when I do go, usually on Fridays over there now, I just go in or actually walk up to where they're giving the food, and everybody who works there knows me. But as far as everybody, I stand in line with the homeless, I get my food with the homeless, and I go sit down with the homeless and I eat with them, knowing that I have purchased a slice of bread and a carton of milk. And I can't tell you how fun that is. That is just pure fun for me.
That's really, I love that you figured out how to be, I mean, the title that a lot of people talk about is Minister of Word and Sacrament. And
right.
What a great way that you figured out how to do that outside of the church, that you figured out how to be present with people and connect with people and bring them both word and sacrament in this way. I think that's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing.
Well, I would argue one point you just said. My own personal theology is before I was outside the church. Now I'm smack dab in the middle of the church when I'm out in the parking lot or under a tree. So I don't mean to
I love that. That's
parse terms, but the church is not always the church as it is in the building or the structure. I think church is what the individual Peters or rocks are doing in their community, and that is the church for me at least. And that's the big paradigm shift for me there.
That's great. I think that's really deep, and I think it's part of what people have been learning more and more, maybe even through the pandemic, is that we don't have to be in one building to be church. We don't have to be in any specific denomination. We can be open to wherever we meet people. So I
think you're exactly right. I mean, it may be as simple as holding the door open for someone at Walmart, or being kind to the clerk at the Zippy Mart where you're buying your gas. And unless we can, that's where the real true fulfillment of the church is, I think. It is not necessarily at the steeple. Hopefully it is, but it's not limited to the steeple.
So is there anything else that you'd like to share with us today? Any other part of your story that you think folks might want to hear?
I think my model is certainly personal to me, and probably not too many people could actually do it like I have done. But everyone has an individual gift and interest that you can spin out into a personal ministry, whether it's daycare for children, adult care for Alzheimer's folks or financial support, all kinds of things. I mean, if God is infinite, then God gives us infinite ways to serve him and to become the church. And I think once we get to that point, then that really relaxes all of us. That anything that is heart-born and heart-delivered is a way that God is reaching his cosmos, or obviously the world. And that's really, I like Rumi's statement that we are not just one drop in the ocean. We are all of the ocean in one drop. And if we can ever get that idea that whatever insignificant thing I am doing, it is still all of the kingdom of God in that one little drop. And that's really all I am required to do, or responsible to do, or even accountable to God for, is my little drop and how I am using that little drop of the immense kingdom of God.
So, David, where can people find out more about you and your work?
The best place is on the web at www.parsonsporch.com, and that is spelled ParsonSporch.com. And all the other information there, like email and phone numbers, are available there if someone needs to contact me, either with a manuscript or wants to buy a book or just needs some help. If I can't help you, I'll sure try to find the resources that can.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. It's been really great to hear it from you firsthand. This has been Everyday Spirituality with connect.faith. You can find us anywhere you find your podcasts, and we'd love to have you share with your friends.